A third way that we know that Jesus is true God is that the Bible records for us his divine works. Well, now, these are called miracles. More accurately, they're called signs. But they're things that are just humanly impossible. And the list goes on and on. The first divine work or sign that Jesus performed was turning water into wine at a wedding feast in Cana. Later, he performed even greater things. Now, that's pretty great in and of itself, to just change water into wine. But it shows God's work. God even using the natural resources, the natural things that over time and through the right processes would become what they would. I mean, water goes into the earth, it's drawn up through vines, it grows into the grapes, and the grapes are then harvested and processed and stored away for fermenting, and they become wine. That's the human effort that is totally, of course, dependent upon God sending a rain and growing the plants. But human beings go through a process that takes time and energy and finally produces an end result. Or Jesus just comes in and says the word. And by his word, the water is changed into wine. That word comes to work in other places too. He says a word, and a centurion's servant is healed. He doesn't even go to be with him. He doesn't even go physically to the location where the servant is, because the centurion says, I'm a man under authority, and I say go, and this one goes. Said, you're greater than I am. You're God. Say the word, and my servant will be healed. And that's what Jesus did. It's not something a human being can do. In addition to the healings, Jesus delivered demons out of people. So he forced the demons to leave these people, and that took the power of God. It was such an amazing thing that people were starting to follow him just because he had this power. And religious leaders were opposed to him, saying that it's by Satan that he's driving out Satan. They knew that it took superhuman power. There was something above a human being to do this, but they were unwilling to think or admit that he was God. So they said the opposite. He was using Satan's power. The other miracles that Jesus performed, eventually, we see him not just healing people, but raising people from the dead. At first, the people were people who were recently died. Jairus' daughter is a good example. He goes to Jairus. Jairus comes to him because his daughter is dying. And they get word on the way that the daughter had died, but Jesus comes to her side anyways. And just with the word, Talitha Koum, little girl, I say to you, get up. And the touch of his hand, this girl who's dead, and we know she's dead because all the mourners were there, all the people were wailing and crying because this girl had died. Just with his touch and his word, she comes back to life. Now, that's amazing enough in and of itself, but people might make the argument, well, there are people who die and come back to life, and use CPR or start their hearts again. We see it or hear about it all the time in our society. And we could argue about, well, Jesus didn't have all those medical advantages, etc., etc., but he takes away any doubt by going to the Lazarus tomb. His friend Lazarus was dying. He got word of it. And he intentionally delayed his trip to where Lazarus was, and he intentionally delayed it so that Lazarus would die. And so when he arrives at his tomb, Lazarus has not only dead, but he's been dead for 4 days. 4 days. And in the Jewish understanding of things, that means his body has been corrupted. He's in a state of decay. So here this man is in the tomb, rotting away. He's not only dead, he's really dead, decomposing dead. And Jesus says, roll the stone away. And people know. They say, oh, there's going to be a terrible odor. They know that he is dead and decomposing. And Jesus doesn't pay any attention. He says, roll the stone away. He doesn't go in. He doesn't touch him. He just speaks his word. Lazarus, come forth. And to everybody's utter amazement, this man who was dead, really dead, comes out of the tomb. Truly, it's a divine work. It's a work that's greater than anything any human being can do. Even the greatest doctor, greatest scientist cannot do anything of this order. But his greatest miracle, he saved their lives. When he didn't bring someone else back from the dead, but he raised himself from the dead. after 3 days in the tomb, before corruption set in. He raised himself from the tomb to new life. The resurrection that he promised, resurrection he made ours, resurrection he wants us to share in. And that shows us the purpose for all these miracles. They weren't meant to impress people. They weren't meant to tantalize people. In fact, a lot of times Jesus did the miracles and told people, don't tell anybody about this. He wasn't using reverse psychology, but he was saying these are signs, and the signs are meant to validate what I'm teaching you. And people got all caught up in the signs, and it kept him from teaching. He wanted to teach. He wanted to share the Word of God. He wanted to show people that he was the fulfillment of all the promises that God had made. And the miracles, because they excited people, because they tantalized people, drew large crowds that actually limited his ability to teach. So, the signs are there to validate the teaching. And so the Word of God is written for us so that we have what Jesus taught. And we have the signs recorded for us so that we would know what he taught came with power and authority from God. In fact, John finishes the gospel by writing this. Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Jesus is true God. He showed it by doing things only God can do. He worked miracles and signs. But his greatest gift to us is the word that he spoke, the word that brings us life.